James Vincent, licensed this style. A ministry from behind that chair and wherever. Hey, I'm thinking about unrealized potential and self imposed limitations. Who's with me on that? Growing up in a city, I had a lot of friends, lots of friends and people. When you grow up in the city and back in the 60s and 70s, before social media, there's only one way to connect. That's face to face, and we did a lot of that back. There was no other way. So you come to know lots of people face to face, and I'm thinking back now over the years. I think of the potential that a lot of these people and friends of mine had. Like I could just see that could have been so many great things, but because of lack of education, growing up in a city, difficult home lives and all that stuff, people, you get snuffed out. Lots of people get snuffed out. They never get to that place where they could be all they could be, and their potential is limitless. Most of us never get there, but a lot of times it's self-imposed too. Because of how we grew up, and and we're victims. We can go on and on with excuses, but nonetheless. So that being said, I'm up in the cemetery praying where I pray today. I usually pray in the cemetery. It's quiet. It's a quiet. People say, "You gotta find a quiet place." Well, cemetery is a quiet place, and I'm looking at all the graves, right? I'm thinking again, all the potential. Imagine I'm looking at all these graves, all the unrealized potential that probably are in these graves that people never lived up to. Like unbelievable potential that God put in you. The unrealized gifts, the unrealized everything, that you could possibly be. That's in you, that God puts in you, that we never really, a lot of times, isn't manifested in this life. We get little glimpses, little bits and pieces. But I believe when we stand before God, one of the things He's going to show us is our unrealized potential. How much potential we had to be great, because I believe that's how He creates us. He creates us for great things, but we live in a fallen world, and we got a devil, and it's a battle. That nonetheless, that being said, there's great potential in us, and we need to find a way to release that. I'm getting older, and time's running out, so I need to find ways to get out what God's put in me. And someone would say a lot of times, it's not easy. You have to dig it out. You have to spend time with God. You got to dig down deep to pull these things out that God puts in you. And a lot of times you don't want to do it just because, who knows? I know you're lazy. You don't believe in yourself. You have self-imposed limitations. So anyway, here's a example of self-imposed limitations that God spoke to me years ago when I was in California. So with this hair show out in California, excuse me, in there's Topanga Canyon outside of Malibu. And so one day when I was off, I was in Malibu, and no, actually it wasn't Malibu. It was Newport Beach. I drove down to Newport Beach, which is like the most exclusive, richest area in all of California. And I pulled in on the road and stopped in front of this Rolls Royce dealership, right? How many Rolls Royce dealerships do you find, right? So I'm parked in front of this Rolls Royce dealership, and I'm looking at these Rolls Royces, and then across the street is the ocean, and actually there was a place right there that sold yachts. So I walk across the street and I'm looking at these yachts, and beautiful yachts, and a couple of these yachts you could get on. They let you just walk on and see how it feels. And I looked around, there was nobody there. I'm thinking, where's everybody at? Anyway, I walked on the yacht. I climbed up in the captain's chair up at the top, I can't think what it's called now, when you're all the way up at the top. Anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm looking forward, and I could see the Rolls Royce dealership across the street. Then up on the hill, if you've ever been to California, Malibu, on that, all the houses that are built up into the hill, all these beautiful homes are all gated communities. The gate's at the bottom. You can't get in unless you live there. But I'm looking at this. I'm looking at California. I'm in this yacht. I'm thinking, wow, look at this. And and all of a sudden, God whispered this thing to me, and He said, self-imposed limitations. And He said, talk about dreaming. He said, no, this is dreaming, right? This is dreaming. Think about our little dreams that we have, right? Maybe start a little business, maybe get one more employee, that's not dreaming, that's surviving, right? I think we don't dream big enough. I know I don't dream big enough. And I believe God wants us to dream big enough, because I know that's what He spoke to me. He said, look up here, look around. This is how you dream. Yeah, this is how you dream. You dream big. It's not so much that He wants you to be looking at material things and wants you to have all these material pleasures. That's not the point. Was you don't think big enough in any way. There's more potential in you than you could believe. But you impose your own limitations on yourself for various reasons. So, just wanted you to know that there's more to you than you think. Now, someone will say, well, how do you get this out? Well, you have to take risks sometimes, right? Yep, that's how you grow. You got to take a risk, and we don't take the risk because we're docile, and we don't really know if God wants us to do that, because there's temptations. Well, I can't be everything. You could come up with all kind of excuses. And I'm not talking about material things too. That's one thing, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what God's put in you. You're a pastor, preacher, teacher, whatever it might be, missionary, admin, administration, hair salon, whatever it might be. Are you living up to the potential that God's put in you? And it could be material, physical too, but it's also spiritual. Are we really all we're designed to be? And this is just my point. I'm not trying to say that it's what's right or wrong, and what's material and what is it, and the temptations that come with it. All I'm saying is, are you all that you could be? And you know that in your heart if you're really living up to who you are, what's in you. Maybe you're an artist and you're a painter, and you're like, oh well, I just paint, but I can't really ever get my paintings into any real art gallery or what, and you make up excuses for yourself instead of going out there and really finding a way to get your art out there. It's an interesting example I just used, because I'm thinking, how many artists die penniless, and their artwork's nothing, and then only to be realized after their death, now it's worth millions of dollars. That's kind of a crazy thought, but talk about there again is an unrealized potential, right? In a different kind of scenario that I just said, but nonetheless, it's an unrealized potential. That guy was great. His paintings are going to be worth millions someday. Now, he never got to the audience he needed, or maybe it was the wrong timing. It was in the wrong century or whatever. But nonetheless, that potential was there, even though it wasn't realized maybe in his time frame. It's realized later, and now it's worth millions and hundreds of millions even. I get my point. Unrealized potential, right? There was greatness in those artists. They kind of knew it, but it never really manifested it in their time frame. But they believed in themselves. They put their artwork out there, and now today it's worth hundreds of millions. Yeah. I have these Modiglianis on the wall. I don't know if you can see these. See, there's one right there. Of course, there's one right here. That girl, the red-haired girl. And I have a few other ones. And when I bought them years ago, and then early prints, obviously, there weren't too many people, unless you were really into the art world, that knew about Modigliani. But now, all of a sudden, he's famous, and all of a sudden, his paintings are worth, that painting, this painting here on this side, you can't see it, just went on the auction in New York for $33 million, right? And he died penniless with nothing. Okay, I'm belaboring that point, but I'm just trying to say we all have unbelievable potential, but we have to take that risk. We have to believe God, right? Believe God. And usually, at least from what I've seen in my life, when I believe God for whatever I'm believing God for, there's a risk involved. There's a bridge you have to jump over. You know, there's a certain amount of courage that you need to do these things. I don't know if I've ever got anywhere without that, almost without taking that risk. You know, years ago when I was first a Christian, I quit my job because I felt called to go on the mission field. Now I was 30 years old, and I quit my job. I had a little bit of money saved. I left. I went to Texas. I went to all across the United States. I went to Europe until my money ran out, and I didn't, basically. And like, I grew so much and learned so much and seen so much. You couldn't put a dollar sign on it, but and I've carried that with me through most of my life, right? A lot of those early experiences. But it would never happen if I didn't take the risk, right? What if I said, "Oh, I can't quit my job"? When I did it, people thought I was nuts, right? Everybody thought I was nuts. What's he doing? No, he's telling me some kind of Jesus freak now. No, he's going to Europe and everything. Oh, we don't know what he's doing. Well, who cares what they think, right? They're not living my life. Taking a risk. I started my business years ago. I had nothing. I started this business up in this town with a couple of my friends and cousins helped me put the shop together. This isn't the shop. This isn't the original shop. And we built a couple stations, put some lights in, and for like under $1,500, and I got an old sign, hung it on outside. It was an expensive sign because I couldn't afford it, and I was in business for under $2,000, and I didn't know anybody. I just believe God's telling me it's time to move on. It's time to break away. It's time to be independent, and I'm gonna show you the way. And again, it meant quitting my job, another job, and taking a risk and not knowing what. And actually, I was married at the time. I just got married, and a child was on the way. And it's like I had to take this risk. And I wasn't doing it because I had a child on the way. And I still had a decent job, and I could have stayed there. But I felt God say, no, it's time to take another jump. And so I did, and here I am 30 years later. It worked out. But once again, it was a risk. You got to risk it. You got to get out of the boat, as they say, right? Like with Peter, right? You got to get out of the boat and walk on the water. And guess what? Peter walked until what? Until he got afraid, right? And he started to sink. And that's what happens too, right? And a lot of times. But here's the thing. At least Peter got out of the boat. A lot of us, we don't even get out of the boat. So, I said all that to say what I said today, that you have great potential, unbelievable potential. You got to take a risk. You got to get out of the boat and see what God does. If you don't get out of the risk, then there's nothing ever going to happen in your life. You're just going to, stay above water and just, hope everything works out. And I don't want to, shake anything up and you won't live up to your potential because you impose those limitations on yourself. And that's it. That's all I have to say. Everyone has great potential. Lots of people put self-imposed limitations on themselves. It's not God. You put them on yourself. All right. That's all I have to say about that. James Vincent. Till we meet again.